Hello, hello. We are live. The Black Sheep Live. I am Salome Siboney, co-founder of The Black Sheep and artist, writer, and speaker. And we're going to be speaking about cynicism today. Let me get in this frame. I'm all the way out here. So why cynicism? Because I think it's actually the silent epidemic that is driving so many problems in our society and also for individuals. And we're going to break cynicism down in this live stream tonight, because what I've found is that it's kind of like a reverse engineering of wellness and positive societal functioning, which is start with the end in mind. A functional society is not a cynical society. A person who is doing well is not a cynical person. Therefore, if you find yourself on this route to cynicism, whether culturally or individually, it is time to pause and figure out what's going wrong. But that's not what we're doing. And this is why we're in this increasingly cynical, dysfunctional culture, both for individuals and for our collective culture, is because rather than saying, wow, I think everything is bad, something must be wrong with the way I'm living or the way I'm thinking, we adopt ideologies and outlooks that encourage us to simply accept that this is just life. Life is just bad. Things are just bad. And you're correct to feel like everything's bad. No, you're not. And even if things were kind of bad, which, I mean, I am of the belief that on a long enough time frame, most things aren't actually that bad today. But nonetheless, even if you are going through difficulties, whether as a country or as an individual, does it actually make you more effective to be cynical about your ability to get through those hardships? It doesn't. And there is some kind of psychological investigations into the efficacy of cynicism, and that is that it's not really efficacious. Most people that are cynical aren't actually thriving, and they end up in this feedback loop by which their cynicism encourages them to think that there's not anything they can do to get out of their negative life state, and thus they just reinforce their cynicism. So I want to talk about not being part of the problem, because Lord knows that it's really easy to be cynical today, whether it's by adopting some political ideology that tells you to look for everything that's bad and to view the world in some kind of depressing, black and white, extreme tribal mindset by which it's you against all those terrible outsiders, or actually everything is a secret, devious plot to control everyone and everything is simply run by greed or whatever. Rather than adopt that, or rather than have your own kind of like life is simply bad and this nihilistic outlook, if you want to actually kind of enjoy life, sometimes you have to reject that. And so how do you do that? It starts with obviously not accepting these kind of ideologies that promote the idea that things are inherently bad. And so for me, that was rejecting leftism, because of course, a central premise of leftism is that you can fit everything into the oppressed versus oppressor framework, which when you really look at it at face value, it's like, doesn't that just set you up for eternal conflict in everything, where everything has an enemy and a victim? Like, that is a shitty worldview. That just sucks. So rather than look at your family and be like, who's the oppressor and oppressed in my family, which would be the premise of leftism applied to your entire life, why not look for a framework that actually leads to your well-being? So that's what we're gonna do. All right, as a reminder, I am live streaming on X, I am live streaming on Instagram, I am live streaming on YouTube and Rumble. So if you are in any of these live streams, feel free to drop some comments in the chat. I'm really curious if other people are having this experience by which you're noticing it feels like there's an increasing cynicism in our culture. And I've noticed this both in conversation with people around my age or a little younger, so like late 20s and younger, where it seems like the thing to say is that things are bad. That's kind of like the safe zone of conversation. It's just like, we can all agree that things are bad. And I reject that because, again, I think that our perspective is so subjective, and while reality is much more objective, our perspective is limited on reality. We don't see all of reality. This is why I do a weekly live stream that is just rounding up good news, because I realized how often we really don't see good news and how much more often we don't even spend time discussing it. You will see every headline that's negative get dissected and turned into discourse for days. But if it's good news, it's like a blip at best, where it's, oh, this is happening. Nice. Okay, moving on to fight over some other thing. So of course, if that's what we're generally consuming, then we're going to have this sentiment that things are generally bad. But I don't actually buy that. I think the things that we look at are generally bad, and that's a choice. So perhaps we should choose otherwise so that we can actually enjoy our lives. I think so much about how, like, previous generations, like my parents and their grandparents, lived in much harder times, right? Like, we're talking about like people living in the Great Depression and countries that were like incredibly struggling in poverty and war and conflict and like actual legitimate oppression, lacking of rights. And yet on their day-to-day, they were more wholesome. You know, they were more focused on, what am I doing with my family? Like, oh, we're just gonna have dinner and be in our community, because they weren't consuming a stream of bad news all day long. That simply did not exist. And if you look around you in your actual local vicinity, it's not a war. It's not somebody getting shot every day. It's not people are fighting every day. It tends to be more monotonous, mundane, people just being polite, elevator conversation type of things, nice sights of kids playing, whatever, these kind of wholesome things. And so the fact that we, in some ways, really live in a much more abundant, safe, and free society, and yet we feel like the common consensus is that things are bad, really shows that a lot of this is being driven by what we consume and what we are looking at and engaging with. And that's so often now not our actual local reality, but this virtual reality, which is very prone to the negativity bias. The things you see on social media, on the news, are not reflective of what's actually happening in the world. They're very often reflective of what's going to get your attention more. And that is often something negative. And so if we base our perspective on things off of a skewed media diet, then we have a skewed perspective. So all of this to premise that I really believe it's not delusional or cope for me to reject cynicism as realistic or rational. On the contrary, if our perspective is malleable, and if so much of what shapes our perspective today is a biased media diet that doesn't actually reflect our day-to-day experience of life and our local communities, is not the more rational thing choosing to have a positive perspective as opposed to being cynical because in some neighborhood you have never been, there is more violence. In some country you will never go to, there is a war. Why would you make your life less positive because other people are going through some hardship? Does that help those people? Because very often it's the opposite. It's that we take in this bad news and we become self-absorbed about it, telling ourselves like, oh my gosh, things are so bad and I know how bad things are. And then the next time we see someone, do you know how bad things are? Because I know how bad things are. Oh yeah, I know how bad things are too. I know how bad things are. And it becomes this kind of social signaling where it's like we're telling people that, oh, I know what's going on in the world because I know things are bad. And if I didn't know what's going on in the world, it would be that I didn't know there were bad things, right? Because to know things is to know that there are bad things. And this is the fallacy that cynicism is intellectualism or wisdom, even worse. The idea that if you know things, surely the only outlook you could have is a cynical one. But I think it's actually the opposite. If you really know things, if you're wise, then why would you choose any other outlook but one that you will enjoy and actually brings you tangible benefits, like being pleasant to the people around you and having the motivation to go do good things in the world around you because you don't have this cynical view that everything's bad and it's out of my control. All right, so I'm going to look at the comments here because someone shared. This has been my recent realization. I got sucked into such a dual way of viewing the world. And I was constantly looking for what is right and wrong. It kept me in a constant state of judgment. Oh my gosh, that is such an important realization. And I have had the same thing. I actually think that this is also largely due to media consumption, and particularly social media, because the way that social media really kind of works is judgment. Like, that's what we're doing when we scroll through social media. Do I like this or not? That's a judgment. And it's not that judgment per se is wrong. This is something that people will like rush in and be like, judgment is necessary to make choices in life. That's true. But do you need instant judgment? Do you need to judge everything all the time? No, you can still make choices while postponing judgment long enough to actually just absorb, observe, consider. Instant judgment, which is like what we really get into a practice of on social media because of how fast we scroll through social media, because of how short form everything is. Instant judgment is what really robs us of like depth and that very traditionally mindful approach of let me just observe. Before I cast judgment on this view, event, thing, let me just observe it neutrally. And then afterwards, after I've taken in more information about this thing through neutral observation, I have a better ability to judge it accurately. This is like actually one of the things that I haven't spoken about this very much because there's just so many things that is wrong with social media. I don't know where to start. And though I think it's a great technology because it's allowing us to do this here, right? Which is the real game changer is, and it's so hard, is controlling your usage of this technology with the intention to gain what you actually want out of it. And to be very conscious of whether or not you're doing that. And I think it's so hard because it's a kind of technology that's so readily available to us and so predisposed to us using it mindlessly, to us using it as an escape, that it very often is the opposite. I'm looking for an escape. I want to like lash out at someone on social media, or I'm not in a good mood and I just kind of want to zone out of what I'm feeling. Let me scroll. That's not a good state of being to enter into social media with, because you're probably going to have a negative experience through that. And you're not going to bring that kind of awareness of like, oh, wait, I'm just judging the shit out of everything. And it's weighing on me because I'm like, imagine like constantly, that's bad, that's bad, that's good, I like this is bad. Oh my gosh, it's exhausting. That's what's so productive about that kind of mindful, neutral observer approach, is that it gives you a break from having to do that kind of like constant moral judgment of everything, which is really heavy because all of that is like in some ways a reflection of you and your choices. Now I have to decide this opinion. What does this mean about my life and my choices? Okay, no, it's a bad opinion because it would contradict my choices and my life. And you know, it's just like, That is so much going on there. And do we really need to do that for tweets? Probably not. But that is our default mode, judgment. It's just, I like that. I don't. That's bad. That's good. That is a very normal mode for human beings to be in. And in a medium like social media where things are so fast, I mean, what are you going to do? You really, are you going to sit and mindfully absorb and observe a post? We don't do that. It's really not built for that. And so that to me is what's so dangerous about it. Because like, as much as you probably know, I need to use this mindfully. I need to be aware of what I'm doing. Am I like just lashing out? Am I just like using this to distract myself? We don't often bring that consciousness and intention to social media because it is not built for that. It is very much built as a distraction. And so it takes so much effort to decouple that kind of usage from what we actually want to do with it. And so I'm really glad that people are here for this live stream, because this is my attempt to do exactly that, which is, oh my gosh, it's so easy to just complain about everything, for me to get on here and be like, let me tell you what I hate right now. Let me tell you what's bad on social media. Let me tell you who's wrong and why and what and whatever. And it's just like, do we even really need more of that? Because part of my like issue with the media and social media is how negative it is how much I see like the inclination for just constant criticism. I mean, there's so many debates that I'm like, that we don't even have to debate this, right? Like, you can live your life and I can live mine. There's really no reason for us to have to debate our dating preferences or something like that. Like, they're really just our preferences, and that's okay. We don't have to get into this like deep moral argument about who's right or wrong with our dating preferences. And yet that's what happens on social media, because it creates this illusion that we're all in this town square together. And so, well, someone has to be right and someone has to be wrong. We can't both be right. But we kind of can't, because we can just not debate the shit out of everything and constantly make it a conflict issue. And so we're going to try in this live stream to intentionally undo the cynicism that social media encourages in us. Let me take some more comments here. Well, most may allude there are issues, but most won't say it face to face and use social media to vent. It's like they have armor from behind the keyboard. That is a big one. I've been noticing this myself, how much I'm like, I know that this person would never say this if they were in person. And actually, I've thought about it in regards to the recent fires in LA, because you have these people that are just like, the rich don't really need sympathy because they're just going to build a new house. It's like, what if their pet burned alive in there? Like they lost everything. Irreplaceable things, family photos, like precious things that cannot be replaced. Is that not warranting sympathy? Sure, we can get it into a comparison thing and be like, well, there's some people that have it worse, but is a historically bad fire situation really the time that we need to rank people's suffering? But this is the kind of thing that if you're at a party in person and, you don't really know people well, or maybe you do know some people well, people are a lot less likely to be the first one to say, I don't feel bad for some of the people whose homes burned down in the fire. It takes a lot for the culture to arrive at that place where someone feels comfortable to state openly, not knowing if other people agree with them, a deeply antisocial belief. And this is what is so crazy about how social media works and how it has warped culture, is that you don't actually need to get over that kind of social guardrails where it's like, let me act somewhat normal and likable because I don't want to be the only odd one out that's like, haha, I'm a sociopath. I don't care about certain people's house burning down in the fire. Haha. Like, there is this natural inclination for us to socially self-regulate, to not be the weird antisocial people at a party. But that doesn't exist on social media. On the contrary, if you say some weird antisocial shit, you might go viral. And you can bet there's going to be a bunch of other weird antisocial people that are like, yeah, I hate the rich. I hope their dog burned in the fire too. Like, just nasty stuff. It is there. And that's part of what's so crazy, is that this kind of like social filter that humans have historically had just forever, because your reputation matters in your social life, and you don't want to tarnish that reputation by being so over the top and saying things that people are like, I think this person is unwell, or like a sociopath, or something's wrong with them. Like, that is such an unhinged belief. No one in this entire room agrees with them. No one in this community agrees with them. And of course, this has negatives, right? Like, that's part of why free speech and social media can be beneficial, is that it does allow outlets for people to speak when maybe their whole community doesn't agree with them, but they're still right. Nonetheless, we've got to contend now with this other side of that coin, the negative side, which is some of the shit shouldn't be said. It's not beneficial for anybody to say it. And yet now there's a platform for it. And then there's people that can say, yes, yes. And so there you go. So that's the conundrum we are in. And I think there's just like a race to the bottom scenario with social media. And that's part of the cynicism problem with it, is that if you want to be cynical, you're going to find an audience that praises you for that, and it just makes it more entrenched. Whereas my theory is that cynicism used to kind of be a little impolite. I don't know if anybody remembers this. So older generations didn't complain as much, right? Like, that was a little bit more of a social norm, was that complaining is a bad look. And there was this idea more of like dignity and honor and self-respect. And while all of these things can be rightfully criticized as like, oh, well, there's some times where you should complain about something because it's a genuine problem, or you should open up that you're upset about something. You know, all of the criticisms that we've all heard that have now led us to this other extreme, where it's not just complaining is good. It's, I'm going to look for everything that I can possibly complain and turn into a problem. And so now we're at the other side of this. But there was a time in our culture, and I think others too, where this kind of cynicism that I see now was considered not just impolite, but like bad character. It was like you had a bad character if you were this downer, negative person who always pointed out the things that were wrong and like brought everybody down. And in some ways, yeah, that is a bad character. You are choosing to constantly focus on the negative. There's plenty of negative. Nobody needs any help remembering what the negative is. On the contrary, what makes a person so uplifting and such a valuable member of a group is that they do the opposite of that. When there is so much bad to focus on, they remind you what is good, what matters, what you value, why you should keep going, what you should focus on. These are the people that actually uplift others. And so that's what we're going to try to do here, is be those people and remember how to be those people. And that's why I say, like, rational optimism is the real counterculture. As opposed to being a person who's like, oh, wow, let me remind you of all the bad things, as if that is not the easiest thing in the world to do right now, is just open your phone and be like, wow, everything's on fire. Like, nobody needs any help remembering that things are bad. We're really at full capacity on how bad things are. What would be really countercultural right now is hope, is rational optimism that reminds us why we keep going, why we hold to the principles that we have held. And so I'm going to get into a little bit of why I think cynicism is actually so much more destructive than just, oh, it's a bad vibe, or, oh, it's not going to make you happy. I think cynicism actually is, in some ways, incompatible with a healthy, liberal society. So if you have a society that functions on trust and on a kind of, how can I say, like the benefit of the doubt to the other, it cannot be a cynical society. And in some ways, I think what we're seeing now, the rise of identity politics, this kind of like very negative version of feminism, right, where men are inherently oppressive, and the racial identity politics, we're seeing like a rise of white nationalism, of different kinds of ethno-nationalism, Jewish nationalism, this idea that identity groups need to advocate for their own needs because they can't trust other identity groups to care about their needs and to uphold those needs. This is the same kind of rhetoric I see growing in white nationalist groups online, where the idea is we're being left behind and we have to band together to advocate for our needs. And so these identity politics are incompatible with a liberal society that is built around individual rights and equality. Because the minute you have groups that do not trust each other enough to believe in and support a system by which everybody gets treated as equal, you do not have that system. And I saw this on the left, and now I'm seeing it on the right, by which the imperfections in American classical liberalism, this ideal of freedom for all, equal treatment for all under the law, individual rights coming first above collective rights or rights that are tied to identity groups. These tenets of a classical liberal society are being attacked on both the left and the right. And I think it is a function of cynicism. And let me make a wider lens here by which to analyze this, because this is not unprecedented. Racism historically starts to resurge when there is a concern about scarcity, when there are concerns about unfairness. And unfairness is usually more of a concern when there is scarcity, because people get more nervous about their future. And so they start looking around for threats. Who can they blame? Who's on their team? And so, of course, naturally, once we start getting into that like more primitive, my survival comes first, my survival is being threatened, we're less trusting. And we naturally start to revert to collectivist, tribal ways of thinking by which we band together with who? The people that look like us. That's generally what the primitive human brain starts to look for as the easy metric of who's on my team. Now, of course, that is absolutely wrong. There is no reason that a white person or a woman or a black person is going to necessarily have your interest in mind simply because they share your identity. I haven't seen that. On the contrary, criticize those identity politic-driven groups, and you'll see how much they give a shit about your identity as soon as you criticize them. Nonetheless, this kind of retreat into identity politics, away from the classical liberal philosophy that has allowed a country with such an incredibly diverse and massive population to live together for centuries with pretty little conflict compared to most of the world and most of human history. That philosophy starts to come under fire when people are scared. And cynicism is part of that fear. And so you've seen this in the past, right? When there's like war, which causes poverty, which causes fear, and economic struggles, which cause poverty, which cause fear. When you see these things, you start to see people become less willing to do what is necessary to have a classical liberal society, which is, I'm going to care about the good of all, not just the people in my group, not just the people in my neighborhood. And so with that comes the unwillingness to protect the rights of others. And this has a long history, so I'm not going to go into a huge thing about this. But that is my warning, okay, about how serious cynicism actually is. And I don't think people take it this seriously, because I think that cynicism has largely been conflated with this kind of, oh, it's just complaining, or rather, even worse, it's just seeing things how they are. No, it's much worse than that. Because when you get into that mindset that things are bad and things are going to be bad, what is the rational next decision? It's to start looking out for you and yours more than anything else. It's to not think about, oh, how we can have a better future. What would be like a hopeful vision for our future? On the contrary, you just want to survive. And so that is not the attitude of a healthy individual or a healthy society. And I think it's really sad. Now, I didn't live through a time of like high optimism, but you can look back at like futurist drawings and philosophies where people would theorize on like, oh, what is the future going to look like? And they'd draw flying cars, and they'd imagine that like people would live in these extravagant buildings, and that society would just be so much more fancy and optimized, and there would just be amazing technology to make our lives easier. If you ask someone what you think the future of this country will look like in 50 to 100 years, what do you think they're going to tell you? Do you think they're going to tell you it's going to be so cool because we're doing so much science and research? We're going to have all these like technological advances that make our lives better, and medicine will be better. They'll probably cure death, and we'll have flying cars, and we'll have all these efficient mechanisms for the hard parts of our lives. I think some people don't even think this country will exist in the future. And so you can think about just that example of how there was this tendency towards optimism in the future in previous generations versus what the tendency is now in our current time, which is towards like doomerism. Like, we've got a word for it, doomerism. So this is really real, guys. Like, this is actually a real fucking problem. And I don't really see anybody talking about it, because I think for the most part, I don't know, everybody's too busy fighting or like consuming the bad news, or they are the cynics. So they're just like, no, this is real. It is real. I'm not going to talk about cynicism because cynicism is just reality. So that's not my vibe. Okay, one, because it doesn't work, and two, because I believe that you kind of have to reverse engineer success in some ways. And so that looks like saying, what would a healthy individual life look like for me? What would a healthy society or culture look like? It's not a cynical one. And so then you can simply look at cynicism as a red alert, which is, oh, wow, I'm feeling cynical. What am I doing wrong? What is it that I'm doing that actually is leading me in this direction that is not healthy for me or for my culture? So let me check my notes here, and I'm going to check the comments, because we're going to start moving along to the more pragmatic side of this, which is how do you not become a cynic today? All right. I'll give you my explanation for how I do this, because I don't want people to think that it's about just like gaslighting yourself into being, oh, I swear I'm happy. I swear things are good. It'll be fine. It's not that. It is about actually having a belief system that depends on optimism, that like believes in it. And so one of the things that I use that's like my safeguard against ideologies, like more expansive worldviews that try to inculcate you with the belief that things are really bad, things are getting worse, is history. Like, if you actually just look at history on a long enough time frame, and I don't even mean that long, I mean still blink of an eye long in terms of evolutionary history, like just go back 500 years. We have medicine. Nobody is doing surgery on you without anesthetics. So just medicine is already like a huge white pill on, okay, wait, like things have gotten substantially better. And if you put yourself in the perspective of a person who would have lived during these times where there was such scarcity and there was so much more hardship on a regular basis, it gets a lot harder to believe that story that things are actually really bad, things are only going to get substantially worse. Because you simply cannot corroborate the two stories. Things are either better or they're worse. Now, things can be getting slightly worse on a shorter time scale, and that's where I think most people mess up, is because we're only looking at things like over the last 20 years, maybe max our lifetime. I know some people like to look back one generation and be like, oh, things were better for my parents in this way. And it's like, okay, that's not even the blink of an eye in terms of human history. That's not even the blink of an eye in terms of American history. And American history is not even the blink of an eye in terms of human history. So we're talking about teeny tiny little fractions of the time that humans have lived in societies, and saying that, well, this little fraction, I'm going to make this my whole sample size. But that's actually highly irrational to do. Now, of course, that's what we do because that's what we know. If you knew what it was like to be a peasant in the 1500s, you would be jumping up and down every day. Now, of course, eventually you would fall in line with the hedonic treadmill and be like, well, I'm kind of tired of air conditioning and antibiotics. And it's not even like I get surgery so much. Anesthetics are great, but I mean, it would be nice if they had cured illness and made healthcare free. You can imagine a 1500s peasant quickly becoming a leftist because they're in our cynical society, and they quickly are just I mean, yeah, it's nice, but, I've been here a few years. It's not that great. France has better healthcare, whatever. Could totally imagine that. Don't be that person. That's the thing. Don't be that person that gets taken in by the hedonic treadmill and is simply never satisfied, and then lets that become your worldview that justifies cynicism. Don't waste your life with cynicism. It's really that. You can choose how you're going to do something. Are you going to do something in this kind of more grateful energy? Are you going to do something in this depressive energy? Are you going to do something in an angry energy? You're going to do something in a joyful energy? You have all these choices. And of course, we get used to the choices that we make, and then we repeat them as a habit. And that habit can very much be the energy with which we do things, the mindset with which we do things. And cynicism is one of those things that it's is that really what you want as your go-to experience of life? Is things are bad and things are going to get worse? That's irrational to me. That is actually an irrational choice, especially in a time when it's historically, compared to most of human history, things are much better now than most humans have experienced. I mean, just think about all the people that died in terrible wars and all the terrible illnesses that people have had to have with no cure and little relief. That is enough. That is enough. And just the abject poverty that people dealt with, and the scarcity of food, and there's so much hardship that you can take a moment to reflect on, to gain some perspective, to realize that acting like you live in some doomer society in the United States in 2025 is delusional. It's delusional. You're just consuming too much bad news. That's really what it is. And I know I'm right there with you. I am consuming the bad news too. Trust me. That is why I'm doing this live stream, to remind myself that what you consume is not necessarily reflective of reality. Your experience is more reflective of reality. And so why not mold that experience in a way that's actually constructive for you? Okay, so that is one reframe that you can use. Here is the other reframe that you can use to not succumb to cynicism in a cynical society. And this is, I like this one, right? Because it can be helpful. I think cynicism is often a sign that you're thinking about yourself too much and you're too involved in your own little world and your own thoughts about the world. And the better focus to have is on the people around you and your community and the impact you want to have on the people that you come into contact with. And so instead of getting fixated on this idea of like, why is cynicism rational actually? Well, look at all these bad things. I mean, of course it's correct to believe that things tend towards bad. Entropy, of course. Things are going to be bad eventually. Look at all the bad things that have happened. Look at the pattern of the way things are going now. Cynicism is rational. Does cynicism help you raise your children? Does cynicism make you a better neighbor? Does cynicism make you a better caretaker of your parents, your family, the elderly in your family? Does cynicism make you a more uplifting energy within the things that you do, whether it's at work, being on social media? Do you like consuming the cynicism of others? Do you like dealing with cynical people? Can you think of a time where you were in a more positive mood and you were around a cynical person? And how much of a killjoy that is, quite literally, when you're actually in one of those moments where it's like, you know what, things are kind of good, I'm vibing, it's all right. And then someone reminds you that, well, actually this terrible thing is going to happen, or like, oh, don't you have this terrible like work thing to do? Or how does it feel when those people show up and kill your vibe? Don't be that person. And that is another like bulwark against cynicism, is stop thinking about whether it's so rational for you to look at the world and focus on the bad things. Think more in terms of a pragmatic approach to life, which is, okay, maybe I could focus on all the bad things. There are plenty of bad things. There is a good argument for the fact that cynicism is a somewhat realistic perspective. You can make that argument. Is that the argument that you want to give to your children? Is that the person you want to be in the lives of others? Would you like that? That is really the thing here about choosing to not be cynical and to instead be this kind of like rational optimist, is that it's actually more effective and it makes things better. So rather than just kind of succumb to, oh, things are bad, I'm a cynic, and now I'm just going to be that way for everybody else in my life, why not try to make it not that way? This is the other kind of irrational thing about cynicism. It's like, actually things are bad, so I'm going to be part of the problem. Cynicism. Like, that makes no sense to me. If things are bad, why add to them? Why uplift them with your attention and make them bigger than they would be without that? So that is bulwark number 2 for avoiding cynicism. Now, I already discussed that I think it's fake to conflate cynicism with intelligence or wisdom. Like, legit, like, if you are so smart, be happy. Like, if you are so wise, why are you miserable? Why are you wasting your one life focusing on all the things that are bad that it's not going to change by you focusing it? That doesn't sound so wise. I want to discuss different manifestations of cynicism in culture. So I've talked about like political ideology. But the other thing is like, oh God, and this drives me crazy. It's like critical theory culture. And I'm not just talking about like critical race theory. I'm talking about like the kind of, junior college level literary criticism by which people just assert some view that actually the movie is about patriarchy because the female character breaks up with her boyfriend. And so the whole film is a commentary on how women are subjugated at every turn in society. And it's like, that's what you took away from that? That sucks. Like, that's real sad, bro. All right, I guess that's the vibe that you're on. I, on the other hand, am going to look for what I would enjoy in this film, which is this female character let go of a burden that was holding her back, and now she is free to develop into a fuller person and to express her individual ethos and talents in a way that is unburdened by the controlling behaviors of another. See how that is kind of different? Like, it's the same process of film interpretation, but there's an intention there, which is, what are you going to look for? And that's why art is such an interesting psychological phenomenon, as well as just an artistic phenomenon, is that it's very much like a Rorschach test in so many ways, which is like, you'll have people that look at a painting or watch a movie and they're like, this is about prejudice. This is about late stage capitalism. And it's like, ooh, I wouldn't like it so much if it was about that. That seems really depressing and heavy. I mean, maybe there is art that is about that. It doesn't always tend to be very good art, but that's my personal take on that. That is an aside. But nonetheless, it's like, so when you consume things, you look for proof that things are bad. When I consume things as a rational optimist, I look for things that prove there is goodness in humanity, that we can overcome, that the human spirit contains something sacred and good. That's the worldview that I choose to let my confirmation bias work on, because we all have confirmation bias. And so you better be damn careful about what you choose to believe, because your brain is going to get to work confirming that. And if you think that you're going to simply not have confirmation bias, you're wrong, because that's how the brain works. And so what's more realistic is to have a belief system that confirmation bias would be good for you. It is helpful for me that my confirmation bias proves that humanity is mostly good. I like that. That helps me get out of bed in the morning. That helps me to trust people more. That helps me to be a good person and to do good things. If I started from the premise that humanity is mostly bad and my confirmation bias worked on that, my life experience would be worse. It would just be objectively worse. And so this is something that people have to work on in therapy. The idea that like humanity is mostly bad. You can have terrible experiences like that really make the case that humanity is mostly bad. It's not to say that that's not in some ways a valid analysis of life, but rather that so is that humanity is mostly good. So which one is more efficacious for you to focus on? That's really what it comes down to. Okay. So another manifestation of this, I think, is just like, I saw this also, well, leftist ideology is really like cynicism driven. It's why it's such a vibe killer in so many ways. And you see this in the kind of like weird status games that leftists play a lot, which is like, you can't speak about that because you're a white person, and this is an issue that only a brown or darker person should be able to speak on. Or this thing like, oh, well, you just assumed my race, but actually I'm biracial and disabled. And as a disabled person, I pull rank. Like that weird shit that we've all seen, where there's this absolutely irrational discussion, right? The whole premise is your opinion is valid based on who you are, not based on whether your opinion is actually valid and can be backed up with evidence. No, that is all irrelevant. Who you are is what will make your opinion relevant. And so, of course, this just ends up with everybody in this weird space where no one can be actually honest, which is what I experienced when I was a leftist, and was probably one of the things that really drove me away from collectivism as a whole, like any philosophy that promotes the idea that the individual should be subordinate to the group's interests, because it creates this hostile environment for authenticity. Because really what you should be doing as an individual in a collectivist culture is benefiting the collective, and your authenticity may or may not do that. You really can't know. So instead you just have to conform to the group. And so that just creates this kind of dynamic where being honest is not a virtue, is not desirable. And you see that all the time where people just get absolutely grilled because they didn't use the right word for something, or they describe some politically incorrect truth, and none of that matters. The crime is that you said the thing you're not supposed to say. And so it creates this just like soul crushing culture where people are so hyper vigilant about like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to be the wrong thing. So I just have to like perform the right thing all the time. And so of course they become overzealous performers, which means they often are the ones like leading the mob to attack some other person for not being as good as performing, because like, oh, that proves that I'm really committed to the group. See, like I will take someone out if they aren't committed to the group because I'm so much more committed. It's just like, in some ways, the most cynical kind of culture you can create, which is a culture that has no respect or tolerance for the imperfections of humanity. Like there's no respect for authenticity. There's no respect for honesty, for openness, because none of these things really actually serve the group if the group's main goal is just self-preservation and control. And so that is a manifestation. Like when you see these things that are like anti-human, in some ways, this really is a manifestation of cynicism, which is like, I have to control other people. I have to put them in their place because that's how I do good things. Okay, let me know if you've seen other manifestations of this kind of cynicism, because there is a lot. And I think it's good to start realizing that it's more than just what we think it is, which is someone complaining. It's a lot more nuanced and widespread than that, and it shows up in different ways. All right, let me jump over my notes here. All right, so at this point, we're gonna start wrapping up soon because I'm very hungry. I'm gonna be cooking pork chops tonight, which is something I haven't cooked in ever. I don't think I've ever cooked pork chops. So if you have advice for cooking pork chops, I'm wondering if I can put them in the air fryer. I don't know, but we may experiment because we're not a cynic here. We're not a cynic. I'll cook the pork chops in different ways. I'm sure it'll come out good. See how much more fun that is than being like, it's not going to come out good. All right. So I want to briefly round up like why you should have hope. Big promise about what I'm going to give you right now. But I think it's actually quite simple in some ways. And it's like, you have to have hope because you need to have hope. You actually have to have hope to live. Hope is a precondition of living. When you don't have hope, you will not live. And you may not live long because hope is the fuel of the future. It is what keeps you moving forward. And so the minute you get into a place where you start to argue against having hope, you're in danger. Your society is in danger because that is not a life-giving perspective. Anything that demonizes hope or rationalizes away hope as something that is petty or silly or unrealistic is not life-giving. It is the opposite of that. It is soul killing. It is life extinguishing. And I think you see this very much in American society. The less hopeful of a culture we have, the less we believe in our country's future. Those things go together. It's not a coincidence that we have a more cynical culture and people also don't believe in the future of that culture. So you have to have hope. You don't actually have a choice because the alternative is really, really bad. So I recommend against it. And the other part about having hope is that it makes you a better person. And I don't mean that in like a judgmental way, but rather it literally just lets you be a person better because you will be able to be a person more. You will have more person energy if you have hope. Because why would you do anything if you don't have hope that maybe tomorrow might be a little better? Maybe tomorrow will bring something good and beautiful and interesting and worthwhile. That's what hope is. That's not what cynicism is. Cynicism is the idea that things will get worse, that things tend toward the bad. And so I argue in favor of the exact opposite. Have hope, because hope actually works. It is the more rational position to have as a living being. I don't think animals are cynical. And I think when animals do get cynical, that they don't live very long. I think that we know what a cynical animal looks like, and it's a one that has lost the will to keep fighting for life. So why would we rationalize cynicism for ourselves? Why would we try, whether through political ideology or personal beliefs, tell ourselves that it is correct to be cynical about the future, to believe that things are generally bad, simply because we mostly consume bad news? I mean, if you're being honest with yourself, is your cynicism not at least more than 50% influenced by your media consumption? And if that's the case, could you not change that by consuming things that are positive, that are examples of human triumph, that prove that humans have and do overcome and create beautiful things and do wonderful things? And if that's the case, then why aren't you doing that? If you're so wise, if you're so smart and you're so rational, why are you choosing to make yourself cynical? So that is my argument in favor of hope. Be hopeful because it is the only rational choice, and it makes you a better person to the people around you. And I think that in some sense, like, that's the whole point of life, is to keep moving forward, keep trying to make the things around you better, and be better to the people around you. If more people did just a little bit of that, things would be better. So it's not a pie in the sky crazy theory. It really is just action follows from action. And I leave you with that. Let me know if you have any questions about cynicism. I will check them in the chat briefly, and I'll remind you that I live stream now several times a week. So please subscribe to wetheblacksheep.com so you can stay updated on these live streams and join in when they happen. And if you haven't yet, consider a paid subscription to the Black Sheep, because you will get soon to come private live streams where we'll actually be able to interact directly. I will be able to take many more questions, and we'll be able to share thoughts in more collaboratively as opposed to me speaking at you, which I love to do, but I know people like to share their thoughts too, and I would like to hear those thoughts. And so a paid subscription to the Black Sheep is where we can do that, where you can find your people who are hopeful, who believe in individualism over collectivism, who believe in freedom over control, and who actually want to build communities voluntarily, not with force, that make us and the people around us and hopefully our communities better. So join me at We the Black Sheep. Hope and faith. Yes, that is it. That is the recipe. You got to have faith in something. And this is the thing I'm not particularly religious myself, but I have faith. I have faith. It might not be in the same thing that somebody else does, but again, faith is a precondition of life. In some ways, it is very entwined with hope. That idea that it's worth it to keep going, that maybe you don't know everything, and that's okay. And the secret that shall be revealed in the end is a good one, right? In some ways, that is what faith is. And I think that's very beautiful. Yes, I agree. It doesn't have to be about religion. All right. Any more questions? I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you guys for joining. I really appreciate hearing all your comments from you, Noah, from you, Bree, and from everybody else that dropped their really interesting perspectives on this. It's something that I think we need more more conversation, more discourse, more creations that embody this energy of like, it's actually okay and good to believe that tomorrow could be better. I really think that like, you got to hold on to hope. Don't let the cynics win. What is the I'm getting real religious here, but like, they know not what they do. You know what I mean? Like, the cynics know not what they do. So don't condemn them, just show them the light and be the light. That's what it is. All right, guys, I'm wrapping up. Thank you for joining, and I will see you on the next live stream. You can go to my bio to join wetheblacksheep.com. You'll get my essays there, my previous live streams, which you'll probably enjoy if you enjoyed this one, and you'll be able to stay in touch so you don't miss the next one. All right, all. See you on the next one.